Good day to all the listeners of the Trans Intersex History in Africa Archival talk show. Today we start in a completely different way because as we promised in the advert, we are today switching the roles and I am interviewing Victor, our own host, but today I am your host. So just to say again to everyone as people are joining in, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in whichever time zone you are. So I'm really looking forward to introduce to everyone somebody that actually also don't really need an introduction, and that is Victor Mukasa, also known as Uncle Vic. Uncle Vic, Victor Mukasa was one of the co-founders of SMUG. But even before that, and that was in 2005, even before that, Victor was already an activist at heart. One could say being born activist, right? So I'm not going to run through everything of Victor's bio because we really know Victor very well. And also I want to bring Victor on stage because I'm actually really very excited to hear Victor talking about himself today. So studio, if you are able, yes, to bring us Victor. Good day, Victor.
Good day to you, Liesl.
And I'm not going to really ask you also to keep on adding more things of your bio besides our website that have a very long bio for you and people know you very well. We also know how Google works. I rather want to ask you a few interesting questions to break the ice.
All
So
right. I need that. I need to break the ice. I'm not so used to sitting on this side of the table.
Exactly, but also I feel like I'm not sure if I believe you because in your past career you were many times interviewed. But let's leave that for today. So, but okay, in our studio you didn't sit on that side. That is very true. No lies there.
Right. Right.
Okay, so then in this case, I would like to ask you start to tell us a little bit where is Uganda located on the map of Africa? Whether we look at this logo here on the screen or where. Tell us a little bit where are we in Uganda? Where?
All right. Uganda. And just to mention that Uganda is the pearl of Africa. Even if it has its own challenges right now, it is the pearl of Africa. And we are located in East Africa. We are bordered by Sudan to the north. We have Democratic Republic of Congo on the west, Rwanda, Burundi, surrounded in the south by Tanzania, and on the east we have Kenya.
Uganda is also a fairly small country, but it's interesting how there's a connection point with so many different nations being on your borders, right? So that is maybe why we speak of the pearl of Africa. If you know an oyster, the oyster shell, and the oyster lies there, and there sits the small little pearl, which is a jewel. So that is where the whole saying comes from, right? About being the pearl
Sure,
of
because it
Africa.
has people like us.
Okay. Well, the location and the people like us. Tell
Right, right.
me, I've heard in the past also about the description, but I think it's much more than just a description. But tell the viewers what is the meaning of the Horn of Africa, East Horn of Africa, because also many times I hear that Uganda is part of the East Horn of Africa.
Yes, in terms of sub-region, Uganda is in the sub-region of the East and Horn of Africa, because you see that horn on the eastern side on my screen. It is the right hand side.
Uh-huh.
Countries in that horn are the Horn of Africa, but as you see, Uganda is not part of the horn, but is within the sub-region. The Horn of
Okay.
Africa is actually Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Somaliland.
Okay, so there we go. So the pearl is just outside of the horn.
Yes,
To
that's
put it
right.
exactly that way. Thanks, Studio, for showing us that map. Because that is to show you how small Uganda is. But okay, I'm going to ask you one more, like almost fun question or interesting question, and then we will dive into the real interview. So tell me, because now I don't want you to miss home too much, but what would you say is some of your favorite Ugandan food, which is very scarce where you live right now, but that you miss? What food do you really love from Uganda?
From Uganda, you see every tribe in Uganda has and region has its own staple food. And the staple food for where I come from, which is Buganda, the kingdom of Buganda, which is the largest kingdom. I don't know if it's the largest, but really very prominent kingdom. The staple food is matoke.
Okay.
Matoke is a type of banana, green banana that we steam. It turns yellow when you steam it, and we eat that with sauce. And my best sauce to eat with matoke is beef.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So
Mhm.
that matoke is what is being called many times in other areas plantain, or here
I
in
don't
Mexico, and I
know.
suppose in Latin America, it's called platano macho, which means the big. Macho is the big
They
one.
might be correct there because plantain is also another type of banana.
Aha. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's move on then, because I can also very easily speak about food the whole time.
I love to talk about bananas. So if you're not careful, I might talk about bananas this whole show.
You see, that's a possibility.
Yes.
So then let's start looking at. I don't want to miss the opportunity for our viewers. Whatever you're comfortable with, let's talk about that small little Victor, the one that was still a small child.
The
Tell us,
Victor,
for example, how that small little Victor grew up. Is
yes,
there any things that we need to know that we didn't know? Tell us.
certainly. Certainly. I'm happy to share my story. Uh, uh, this person here was not called Victor when they were a little child. Yes, that's me around maybe 5 or I don't know. Really, I do not remember. I did not witness with my mind most of my childhood because I was just a baby and a little toddler, and then 5-year-old Vic. My name was Juliet. That is my dead name. Juliet. Oh, I don't see Liesl very well. Is
I know.
Yeah, but I hope that we find you. I was named. I was told that I was named Juliet at birth. I was there, but I don't remember all that. I was named Juliet at birth in 1975, August 16, 1975. That is when I was born. And at birth, they declared that they had a girl child. I just think at this point that they looked at my genitals and announced me a girl child. So I was called Juliet in my childhood. It was cut short to Julie. So, 1975 to 1979, I don't remember much, but I was baptized. I was given the name, officialized the name Juliet. My other name is Mukasa, and was Mukasa then because it is our family name. But remember, girl children in my culture are given what we call a maiden name. And I was just thinking about my maiden name, one of my maiden names that I was given at birth, a name that they get from one of your ancestors. And that name was Namusoke. Namusoke is the female version of Musoke. Musoke in my language means rainbow. And I had never thought through it because Namusoke is my dead name. Like, I do not identify with it at all. And as I was thinking about this conversation, I realized that actually that name means rainbow. So I am not surprised at so many things that have become or I have become in my life to date. So as a child, I was taken to nursery school. I went through nursery school. I don't remember what stuff, all the stuff that happened there, but I remember little bits of my social time as a child and how I played and how my family reacted to my playing. I first of all, I am the firstborn of my mother, of three for my mother, and probably the 15th or 16th born for my father, who had 26 children of us. And I call myself a special child among those because of who I am. And many of us grew up in that house at home. But when I was younger, I remember playing. I do not have a recollection of when I played with a doll, but I have a recollection of when I played with wire-made cars. I have a reflection of when I played shopkeeper. These are the things that I was very comfortable with, that I would sell to the family sugar that they bought. So they would put the sugar in my shop, in my paper shop, and then they would bring paper money and I give that to them. But either the memory of a doll has left, or I just did not play with them. But I imagine the dolls were there, but I do not remember that. And I do not have a recollection of how I related with dolls. Now, as I grew up, I remember that on the street where I'm a war child. We had the war in 1985 to 1986 for the current president when he was coming in as a rebel and a revolutionary. I grew up in the era of guns and wars and all that. So playing war was one of the games that we played. And I was the only girl in my neighborhood that played with the boys. I was captain. Mugisha. Mugisha was a prominent soldier. And so I named myself Captain Mugisha. And as Captain Mugisha, I was really good at the toy gun and the toy guns that we use. We would disappear. We would become rebels. And no girl played with them. There are also other games for boys that I played and excelled even better than the boys. There's a game, if anybody from Uganda remembers, a game called Dulu. That is a game that was for boys. I played that and I remember those very clearly. I was always brought down trees because I climbed trees so much. And they would tell me, get down, girls don't climb trees like that. It was always a struggle for me to play in the ways that I was comfortable with. And that was the childhood part of most of the childhood that I remember. But also I was very rough with my two young sisters, and I used to be pushed off as don't be rough with your sisters. Omwana inegono, like this child is rough in nature. And I believe that the only reason they found me rough is because I played with them as though they were playing with some rough boys, and girls are told to play in certain graceful ways. In those days, I don't know how it is like, except in my family right now. But anyway,
I want to quickly ask you one question.
Yes.
I remember you said you were one of 26 children. Speaking of the whole complete entire amount of children,
Right.
do you know now in adulthood if there was another child that grew up being LGBTIQ somewhere in the spectrum of that? I'm just asking that because that sometimes do happen in families. So
Yes.
without going deep into it, do you know if there was other children that potentially as adults?
I really do not know.
Uh-huh.
And even at that point, I did not have a sense of who I was.
Yes.
I was just being Julie, you know. But I did not have a sense of why. So it was not a thing that I related and looked at others. Even when I look back, I don't see them. And if any of them are like that, then that's their story. But I did not see any
Okay.
of me in them.
Okay. No, good. When do you think, if you can think of incidents, regardless of LGBT issues, but when did you think the personality of a strong activist came forward in you? When did you have to stand up for something? Can you remember how young or when or what happened?
I believe that my activism started when I was in my adolescence, and as a teenager, even if it was not named activism,
Yes.
because I was a rebel. I was a rebel for my identity. I did what I felt was me, but was not acceptable even in my own family. Now, after primary school, which we call probably middle school here in the US, at the end of it, primary school, 7 years in school. I remember I had performed very well in my school, and it was graduation. And when people are graduating, they buy them very nice clothes. And I can vividly remember the dress, the yellow and white dress that was bought for me. It had belts tying from the back, it had laces towards the bottom, and they bought me some white shoes like for Cinderella. The only people I have seen wearing those shoes are like princesses in Disney movies. And I was preparing with my mother and father and family for my graduation for my primary school. And there in my primary, the day that we were supposed to go, I remember my dad returning to take me and my mother to the school. But when they ironed the dress and put it in my room, I felt this was not my stuff. This is the shabbiest thing I can wear on such an important day. Now, if any of you remember football made in Germany those days, the players used to wear, football players, that is soccer players, used to wear very short shorts. And we used to call them a play. So I got my yellow play, and I got a sleeveless shirt for myself, and I put a tennis band on my head and another one on my wrist, and some sandals that were unisex, and I felt like I was the bomb. And when they called us out, my mom and I, to go, I came out dressed like that, feeling so good. The one thing I remember is that I got a back clap from my dad to go back and dress up like I was naked. So, very sadly, in tears, I went back to the bedroom and put on the ugly, beautiful dress, and we went for graduation. But I remember I didn't feel myself. I didn't like myself. I was so angry during that event, even at school. I was sad. And for me, the activism of saying this is who I am at that age, because P7 is primary one is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. At 12 years old, I was able to say, this is how I want to go and this is how I want to look, and place myself in that kind of clothes. So I believe that I have defied gender and gender roles from when I was a child. The fact that I was being forced to play what, not to climb trees, not to walk a certain way, not to be rough in certain ways. While if my brothers were rough in those ways, they were non-stopped. If they were just pushing doors, they were non-stopped. But then for me, they would say, that's a rough way of a girl doing that. So in school, when I went on to secondary school, and in primary school, this primary school, first of all, is where I found out that I was attracted to girls for the first time. But I did nothing about it. But it was a question in my head, because then my mother had bought me a book named The Adolescent Girl. Her reasons are probably very clear. The Adolescent Girl, it was a book to tell you what you're going to expect as an adolescent girl, and what you're going to experience, and everything, and the signs. And also at school we had learned about bodily changes and stuff like that. But it was a shocker for me that in primary 5, I got attracted to a friend, a very close friend of mine. And I remember that after about 2 years, I went and told my mom about it. But mom, because she was my friend. And I asked her, mom, how come the book says this, at school they say this, but I have these special feelings, because I would ask her questions, and she told me they're called special feelings that you feel for the opposite sex. How come I feel very special feelings for my friend Peace? And she was not very clear with her answers, and she said, "But don't worry, this process happens naturally." And so, even if I didn't act on it, it was happening. However, in my vacation before that graduation, actually, I told her about it because I was missing her in a very painful manner. And we were all home for vacation. And my mom told me that those feelings will go, and we shall pray to Mother Mary. She will take them away. Don't worry. And
Wow.
so there was no big deal. My mom was a very informed woman because she had studied abroad and all that. She probably knew what was happening. But anyway, cutting the long story short, the feelings didn't go. And I joined secondary school. Secondary school is where I learned that people like me were called lesbians because I was a girl. I went to a single sex school for secondary school. And I saw lesbians there. But I've always felt like I'm beyond that. I'm more than just that. But I didn't have language for those things. When my breasts started coming out after my secondary school, uh, of course, my body became my enemy. Growing breasts and seeing other things and periods, menstruation happening. Of course, there was a struggle for me, but all through school, I went through being punished for defying school rules. And one of the rules that I defied was school uniform, because also in school is where I stopped putting on the skirt with a belt, because I used to tie my breasts with that belt because of how much they didn't belong to me. And I used to put a trouser sometimes in the skirt. And when I'm walking, I let the skirt down. When I'm in class, I pull the skirt up so that I sit nicely, comfortably in my trousers. So it was a fight for activism, for fight for myself, a fight in my head. And I did not just fight, but I was trying to find solutions to that problem, until later on, when the problem, what they called the problem, was named. And then I started even activism at a professional level.
I want to jump to that topic that you speak about now, because you spoke in school already, you start tying your breasts with a belt. Now I want to jump you forward, and maybe the listeners won't follow exactly, but it's all part of your story. Some few years later, when you were already an adult and being an activist and were in South Africa in the library space of Gala, you saw a photo similar to that. Take me back. Tell me about that.
Right. In 2005, I
Uh-huh.
happened to travel to South Africa. It was my first time to travel out of the country. And there, of course, I went as a lesbian identifying activist, because by that time we had organizing in Uganda, we had Freedom and Rome Uganda, we had Sexual Minorities Uganda, and so many other groups. So I went to represent the organizations I was a part of in South Africa. At Behind the Mask,
Yes.
they had a training, journalistic training, my
Uh-huh.
first journalistic training that I had. And but when you go for these conferences, you visit organizations in that country, you meet people, you network. So I ended up going to the Gay and Lesbian Archives of South Africa.
Uh-huh.
That is what they were called. In these archives, they have a lot of our history as queer people in Africa. And I still encourage people to look up these archives. We have a lot of history there. I have a lot of Ugandan history stored in those archives. Some of the activists you've heard of that have kind of, kept silent, have a lot of history that tells where we come from. And I went there to visit them for the first time. and to look at the archives. I heard that they were very interesting archives of Simon Nkoli, an icon in our movement, in our history. So, but getting there at the reception, I saw so many nice pictures. And one of the pictures that I saw that were hanging on the wall was a picture of this human being who I thought was maybe a girl, a boy, I wasn't sure. They were they had bound their breasts with a bandage. And I stopped in shock. While I'm looking at this person, I have a belt running across my breasts. And I had thought that I am the only person who is stupid enough in the world to hate their breasts so much that they tie a belt so that they don't show. I knew I was the only person who ever thought of such a thing. And here I was seeing somebody doing exactly the same thing. That was a shocker for me. And so I asked the person giving me the tour, what's up with this picture here? And they told me, oh, that's a trans man. In that picture, they're illustrating how they bind their breasts because they hate their breasts. They feel that they don't belong on their body. And this is what they do. This is what he does in order to pass as a man. You have no idea how I felt in that moment.
Because that is what I want to ask you. How did you feel? Like, if you have to think back of that moment, seeing that photo of something you did as a younger person back in Uganda without information. We didn't have internet that time.
I had no information. We had the word transgender or in the names of our organizations, but that word meant nothing. It was just like a decoration. We did not have any programming for transgender people. There are lesbians who used to say, I know what transgender is, and would start explaining. And if a transgender got up to explain, then they don't know what they're explaining. Like, it was just a decoration. The funders would ask for proposals that show that you're dealing with lesbians, gays, and transgender people. People. So we always had the T. Even Sexual Minorities Uganda had a T. Even Farouk's trans women and trans lesbians, like we didn't have language really. And so getting to South Africa and me seeing an actual trans person in this picture doing exactly what I do, which I thought was a crazy thing, that is a crazy thought that I ever got in my life. It was kind of like deliverance. It was a lot going inside me, explaining why I have always done this. I'm not stupid. I am not a fool. I am somebody so different from how the world sees and expects me to be. This is a trans person. I am a trans person. And that is the day I got language. Exactly. That's the picture. That's the picture that I saw. That is the day I came out as transgender in South Africa at the Gay and Lesbian Archives of South Africa, because I found myself in that picture. And it is no shocker that when I left South Africa, in my head singing about my transness, I arrived in Uganda that early 2005 and came out to my community members. Not only just community members, but I mobilized around some of my friends that I believed were like me. Because we were not just butch lesbians. We didn't see butch lesbians hiding so much these breasts of theirs. We didn't see them feeling certain things that we were feeling. So I looked out for those people who were trying to do things with bent backs because of their breasts, and the people with whom we resonated when we spoke about our identities. And together with Nicholas Mawanda, another brother out there somewhere, real brother, by the way, we called all those who identify as transgender to show up at Speak Hotel in Kampala. And we had the first meeting as transgender people, and formed the organization that was called TITS. TITS, like tits, but in full was Transgender Intersex and Transsexuals of Uganda. TITS Uganda. That is when that organization was founded as the first all transgender organization in Uganda. And from that day onwards, a lot of us never stopped to identify as our identity of transgender. Language was a problem. Being socialized as lesbian, knowing myself as lesbian on the other side, and being so fond of the lesbian community as my family, it was difficult for me to leave the lesbian identity behind. It felt like I'm losing a big part of me.
That brings
And
me to a very
transgender was not really talking about what I thought was my lesbian identity, because that is where I found safety. That is where I found family. That's where I found siblings. That's where I got protection. So I could not just live it. And I was leading a movement of people, lesbians, gay men, and so many others. And because we did not understand the language of gender identity so well, I came out with even a more specific name, a transgender lesbian. And that is why you see, if you search about me in the earlier writings, I am referred to as a transgender lesbian. I remember it was used so widely when I was International Grand Marshal of Toronto. People were so excited to meet a transgender lesbian. Like, what does this mean? And I explained it in my own way. And I said, I am transgender. I definitely defy traditional gender roles. I am stubborn in that way, but I also have the lesbian identity in me because I just could not let go. The lesbian identity for me was not just the attraction to other women, but it was more of my safety, my family, my origin, my everything. Until much later, I came to terms with the fact that my gender identity is transgender. I am a transgender man, and not a lesbian in terms of sexual orientation, but I love lesbians so much.
And that's, sorry for almost interrupting you. I wanted to really get to that point because it brings me into actually even on your bio on the Trans and Intersex History in Africa website, on your bio we spoke about this whole identity and claiming yourself. You knew you were trans by that time, but as you say, romantically, I'm with women who are actually most of the times lesbians, especially in those early years. Therefore, I'm both. And that really, really shows us again that you stood up. I remember meeting spaces as far back as the crazy meeting that Kel had in Mozambique. It was crazy for various reasons. But even in other activist spaces where there was fights, where many times lesbian activists fought and said, but you can't say you're a lesbian, you can't, because they saw it from the lens, you want to claim best of both worlds. When it suits you, you want to be trans, and when it suits you, you want to be lesbian or woman. And
Yes.
they couldn't get it that no, it's not because you want to claim best of the both worlds, best of the both, especially if you look at today, things like patriarchy, literally, not as if trans people or women have the best anyway. You
Right.
just keep on choosing another minority or marginalized person, I mean, in
Yes.
reality, yes, if you claimed in those early years you're a man, okay, maybe one can say you claim best of both worlds, but you claimed transgender and you claimed lesbian, which are marginalized anyway the whole time.
Liesl, do you still hear me?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yes, and just to mention on that, as part of my history, I was once a board member at Ilga World.
Yes.
And at Ilga World, during the elections at that general meeting, there was a big question about my true identity. During the campaigns, and they first, I don't know if they still do it, but there would be a moment where people begin to campaign. I didn't feel like campaigning, so I didn't campaign. People were just saying, "We want Victor, we want Victor." And there was a lot of issues during that period around transgender rights and inclusion within the LGBTIQ community. And I remember that people had an issue question: is trans lesbian? But the trans lesbian is supposed to be like this, and I would be like, I am a trans lesbian, I am trans and I am lesbian. But I ended up still being on the board for transgender people. But it's another example of where there was a wrangle about language and identity.
Definitely. So I want to spend, because we really have so much time already, and there's so much more that we can ask. So I'm not really going to ask you so much about the founding of SMUG and the court case, because those things were in your early years of activism, known activism, around
Right.
2005, 6, more or less in those years. But yes, there comes a very nice reminder from from the studio. So
That was me at Sexual Minorities Uganda.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and you already earlier referred a little bit to that. I want to move a little bit forward. I looked it up. I think that the first Changing Faces, Changing Spaces conference was around the year of 2006. And I think it was in that very, very, very first year that there was a declaration.
Yes.
I don't want to give away too much, but you tell us a little bit about that, that moment of that photo.
Yes, it's very important that I tell the background of this.
Yes, please.
After there was a period of time that the donors had put an embargo, a funding embargo on Uganda.
Okay.
And actually, indeed, most of East Africa, but the main target was Uganda. And that is because there had been a lot of misappropriation of resources and stuff like that. And so when we came in to do serious work, the donors were so used to the opportunists who had come before. And they probably thought we are also going to be the same. So they put an embargo on funding, and we had to do a lot of work. I remember myself, Kasha Jacqueline, we did a lot of lobbying with Ford Foundation, who was leading was representing the donors, to actually apologize for the sins of those who came before us and for the mistakes that they have made, and to commit to building a culture of transparency and accountability. Eventually, after serious consultations with so many donors, they opened up, and they were going to fund East Africa again. And they were, but then with new strategies, and one of the strategies was that there was going to be a basket fund in East Africa, the basket fund in a region with people working in that region who know better what is happening within the region. In fact, for those who don't know, that is how UHAI was formed. That is the basket fund that was formed out of that process. So this meeting that was taking place that Liesl mentioned, it must have been 2007. I think it must have been 2007, because then it was not the actual meeting that started the Changing Spaces. Changing Spaces, one of the products of the engagements with the donors. At the end of the engagements, we had a meeting in Nairobi, a meeting that now the Changing Faces, Changing Spaces comes from, which became a meeting that would happen almost, I think, every year or every 2 years. So the first Changing Faces, Changing Spaces is where this happened. But before that, while in Uganda, remember I was having the court case and it was not yet resolved. I was still in hiding and stuff like that. Around the same time, Bombastic Magazine was starting. Kudos
Okay.
to Kasha, who is behind, the activist behind it. Bombastic Magazine was starting. And in Bombastic Magazine, they wanted to put something about transgender rights. And the story they were going to put was that of Victor Mukasa. And they had a story from me. Now, the editor of the magazine said, Victor, this is an illustrative, I don't know what, that journalistic talk. We need a picture for this article. And I said, a picture like what? A picture of, for example, you binding your breasts or you have bound them and stuff like that. And I said, no, I will not do that. And this editor, lesbian identifying then, says, you will, because this is an illustrative article, something like that, feature. And I said, no, I cannot give you that kind of picture just to illustrate what I am talking about.
Exactly.
It's good enough that I'm giving you the story. And then the person insisted that I do that. And then, as a compromise, she said, if you cannot give me a picture to illustrate this story, I am going to use the picture at the Gay and Lesbian Archives, that very picture that you saw of that person binding their breast, to illustrate. And I said, that's not my picture. That's not my chest. That's not my story. She insisted. And then the following day she said, we are going to printing. And I said, as long as you don't put any picture to illustrate that, I'm not giving you a picture and you're not putting anybody else's picture on against my story, or take out the article. And she wanted the article there. So I got pissed. Somebody called me and said, Victor, we are going into printing and they're putting your picture. Somehow she entered the same area I was, and I went and confronted her very badly. Very, very badly. And I felt in my heart that I might do some things worse because I felt like she had attacked the depth of me. She had attacked that which I have fought with and for a long time. She was trying to force me to put what I don't want to put out there, just for the magazine to show that it is representative of transgender people. I was so angry that I felt I was going to commit a crime that night. David Kato, I don't remember, there were other people at the table, came and pulled me away because I was holding her like this, very, very aggressively. They pulled me away. And I'm saying this because sometimes our history comes from such challenges. I am not proud of how I treated her, but my anger about an attack on my identity was so high that they pulled me off her. And I went back to the table where I seated, and I told the people who were dealing with my security during that period, that I need a ticket out of this country immediately, or else tonight there will be trouble. So they got me a ticket to Nairobi that very night because I had to run away. Back at Freedom and Rome, Uganda, they changed because I think Kasha, realized what the editor was doing was not right. They changed it and they published it without a picture. And then, while in Nairobi, when I got to Nairobi, I was so hateful of what they call lesbian gay. And I said, I want to meet trans people tonight in Nairobi. And I called the trans women, they called each other. And before I knew it, I was surrounded by so many trans people, probably about 15. So many means 15. 15 then was a big number. They were surrounding me at this bar. And we were drinking all night. But I told them the story. And I told them how angry I am. And everybody was telling their stories of how angry some people in the LGBTQ community have made them feel. How they have felt like killing themselves even for what family has made them feel. Like, these are trans people, gender non-conforming people, telling the stories of the of the plight they have faced within the community. And so that night was filled with anger from trans people. An idea came. I don't remember how it came up, because we saw the program of the conference, and you see even in the conference, they have all these workshops taking place. They have all these panels taking place. And still on the panels, there's no representation of transgender people. But we have been invited to Nairobi to witness. And, every activist was bringing out ideas, and then they decide, let's draft a document. We are going to take over this conference at an opportune moment. And maybe it is in one of those sessions we will all rise up and go and protest what the organizers have done here to exclude us from the real work at the conference. So we drafted a document in that night. We called it the Nairobi Trans Declaration, because we were going to make a declaration. And in that conference, indeed, at some point, in fact, we waited for the closure. We took over the mic, and we took over the program for the for the event, and we stood up there on the stage and read out our declaration, a picture which was shown earlier. And that was a very, very big step and a very big move and a historical moment for the trans movement in East Africa, when we took up space and claimed a space where we were just on the menu, and claimed it as our space. And it encouraged the organizing within the region so much.
So that is a very, very powerful photo and a very powerful moment. So, as you called it, the Nairobi Trans Declaration. I want to give a shout out to one queer activist, somebody that's unfortunately no longer with us. Studio, if you can put up, there is a photo that we have with Victor and Joel Nana. And then, Victor, if you can just take us for a second to that moment, or the time, just a few little bit details, regarding Joel and your path.
Yes, that's Joel Nana. Rest in peace, my brother. Joel Nana was very much younger than me, but I call him Papa because he treated me as such. And together with Joel Nana, we worked in South Africa on LGBTIQ human rights. At some point, we worked together at the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, currently known as Outright International. And in that picture, we were at one of the so many protests that we were a part of in South Africa. South Africa was home for us because we were both in exile, having run away from our countries for safety. And we continued to do our continental work. We both worked on the continent. Joel was very, very supportive of my identity. Joel was very, very fond of trans people also, and very supportive of trans people. Joel contributed so much, very tremendously, to the queer movement in Africa. Joel was from Cameroon, Douala, and we lost him a few years back. Rest in peace, Joel Nana.
And then, because I'm also looking at the time, that's why I now kind of like jump around, because I mean, we can talk forever about all the contributions and experiences and things you witnessed. In the time that you and Joel worked together, as you say it was those years named as the IGLHIC, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, today Outright International. In that time period, Studio, if you can help us there with a photo from Mozambique, because I also remember the very first Lusophone, for people to understand, Lusophone is the word for Portuguese language, but workshop that was hosted in Mozambique with the support of Lambada. There in the very far corner in the left, you can see close to the flip chart is a person by the name of Daniel. Daniel Da Silva. And Daniel is from Mozambique and helped us with the logistics on the Mozambique side of arranging all of this. And this was the very, very first meeting about, shall I call it, trans awareness. We can't already say fully everyone attended that was already self-identifying as trans, but as you say, back in Uganda, you could see who are potential people that is on the same boat as you. So this workshop was the first time ever that we know about that was completely focused on trans awareness in Portuguese language in Mozambique. Can you talk a little bit about that workshop? I think it was quite monumental. Tell us about it.
Indeed, it was a monumental workshop, but in order to do it justice,
Yes.
is to talk about its origins and where it came from. And where it comes from is a conference, a workshop that we had in South Africa, Cape Town, which is seen as the first, it is referred to as the first Pan-African trans conference. Because first of all, that was its intention, to get trans people from across the continent to meet in one place for the first time, at least the representation of them. And the origins of that first trans workshop in Cape Town that involved people from East and East Francophone and Southern Africa was still because of the commitment of Outright International, or the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, to the inclusion of transgender people in their work. They got resources for transgender work, and they felt that a workshop would be the best thing to do. And I remember that my boss, kudos to Kerry Allen Johnson, who was my supervisor, called me to introduce these resources and say we need to have a workshop of transgender issues in Africa. And so you organize a workshop and invite experts like lawyers, doctors, judges, if you can, like professionals and academia. And I said, thank you so much, but why would we invite those people, experts, to come and talk about transgender human rights in Africa, on a continent where we have transgender people who have not yet even completely defined themselves as a movement? And then I lobbied for that with my boss. It was not a very easy thing, but it was the listening attribute of the organization that eventually they accepted that instead of inviting the experts, I invite those who are transgender in the region. Now, I could not do that alone at UHAI, but also remember there was an organization in South Africa, the first trans organization in South Africa, Gender Dynamics. And Gender Dynamics at that point was already connecting with individuals in different parts of the continent. Gender Dynamics at that point on their board had a transgender person from another country, which was me, and that was helping to connect the coming movement to Gender Dynamics. And eventually, I knew that Gender Dynamics is aware of a lot that is happening to different people on the continent. So the best organization to partner with in this workshop would be Gender Dynamics. And we come on board as equal partners with the resources that Gender Dynamics brings, and the money and me from UHAI, together with Liesl Theron as the leader of Gender Dynamics. We organized this workshop. And even in that, we had so many people relatively so many compared to the numbers of transgender people who were out at that point, from Rwanda, from Burundi, from Uganda, from Kenya, and then coming down to Southern Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, yes, South Africa. And it was such a huge a huge workshop, about 4 to 5 days. It's a workshop with the aim of beginning to define our movement as African trans people, defining our identity. One day we will come to talk about that. But from that, as a follow up, continuing in the same spirit of feeding the trans movement and giving it the strength that it needs in Africa, the next, and we could not get people from Lusophone Africa. The next stop was going to be another trans workshop in Lusophone Africa, still with the same system, gender dynamics, in partnership with EGOHAC, which is Outright International now, in partnership with Lambda, the organization that was leading the LGBT movement in Mozambique then. Together we had that workshop. There were not so many trans identifying people. We didn't have trans people from Angola, which is another Lusophone country, Portuguese speaking country, but we had allies, human rights defenders from that country. And it was such a very educative moment, even for the LGBTIQ movement in Mozambique, and for human rights defenders in Angola, because these are the same human rights defenders who used to represent their countries at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And so we had this conference with Liesl, who has been my partner in good crime for decades. We ate fish together there. We facilitated workshops together with the Mozambicans, and for the first time had a Lusophone workshop there, but also the first workshop or meeting about transgender human rights in what we might call Lusophone Africa, even if Cape Verde was not a part of it.
That is true, and very great that you gave us that whole history, and that there was actually even a history before the Lusophone workshop, just that the viewers can see the full picture of how things were done. I remember in those years, Gender Dynamics and EGOHAC, which is today Outright International, did work together on quite a few projects. We touched on it on other talk shows. So due to the time, I'm not going to now rehearse all of them in here again. But maybe let's talk about one other last aspect of your work, which is still already in the history part of things, because I think as far back or as recent, one can look at it the way they want, around the year 2020, you started actually with some podcasts, with some talk shows. In this moment, your activism expanded to the point that you are now in the diaspora, but you continue focusing your work and activism quite a lot in and on Africa or Africans in the diaspora. But tell us a little bit about that podcast show. And also the studio, maybe you can just show us, because right now it don't exist anymore as a podcast, but on a different type of streaming. But yes, let's hear about your podcast that you started.
Yes, first and foremost, the Victor Mukasa Show podcast is still on Spotify. If you go to Spotify and look for the Victor Mukasa Show, you can listen to the earlier shows that we had back in 2020 in audio. Now, the podcast, I think that my life has been about movement building. Mm-hmm. It has been about creating visibility, creating spaces safe enough for LGBTIQ people to speak out. That has been a passion for me. And it was not surprising that during COVID, the one thing that came to my mind is that I could use this moment to build community for the queer people in Africa who are locked up in their homes because of COVID, but also continue to visibilize what we do on the continent and our movements and our struggles. So the Victor Mukasa Show, the podcast on Spotify, I started it with programs from Uganda, from Ghana, from South Africa, human rights defenders, because that's another thing that I love to do, to honor human rights defenders who have contributed to our lives, to these struggles that are usually forgotten. And that is when I did programs that are called Lest We Forget. In fact, visually, I did one of Liesl Theron, but on the podcast, I did, I think, some activists from West Africa. I intend to do more podcasts for that purpose. It's just not good timing in terms of what's happening in my personal life. However, as time went on, I started to bring it to, and I did also work on refugees on the podcast. And time went on. There was bigger crisis in 2020. In 2020, yes, in Kakuma refugee camp, and I felt a called to create space and highlight the plight of LGBTQ refugees in that camp, who at that point were facing very, very violent mass attacks and other forms of violence because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. So I started streaming on Facebook these shows with refugees, giving them a space to speak out. And again, during that period, hosting human rights defenders from Sierra Leone, from which I want everybody to know where we come from, always. So the show became a thing, the Victor Mukasa Show. And even if it's not so regular right now, it is something that is going to become real. But now I want to also take this opportunity to announce that the Victor Mukasa Show, first of all, is part of the legacy that I want to leave for people when I leave this world. When I leave this world, the Victor Mukasa Show is one of the things that I want to leave. All these things will be under the Victor Mukasa Foundation. And that is the other child that I'm willing to make visible. My children are no longer visible for the public, but I have the third child that is called the Victor Mukasa Foundation, something that I'm going to offer for the world, for the future generations. And under that Victor Mukasa Foundation is the Victor Mukasa Show, will be Hope Upheld, which is for refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants in North America. And then the Cola Initiative, which is about our economic development as a people in Africa. So yes, thank you for the idea, the question, Liesl, of asking about the Victor Mukasa Show and its origins, but it gives me the chance to announce more that is coming as part of the legacy that I want to leave for my people in Africa when I finally expire from the face of the earth.
Well, maybe with leaving legacy, you can look at it in a different way. Here in Mexico and in Latin America, for example, death is only being seen as one of the steps, one of the phases in your continuation. So let's look at it that way.
You don't want me to talk about death, but that is a fact of life.
It's going to happen. But at least, yeah, that's why we even celebrated the Day of the Death, because we continue with that person. You're not leaving us.
Right. So it is a sign that I have not given up on communities. I've not given up on the struggle. I still continue to work for the betterment of our communities. And however small the contribution is, I will always give it.
And then, thank you for that. And then for our parting message, as we do here with the queer or the trans and intersex history in Africa table talks and discussions and all of that, I want to ask you a parting message. I'm going to ask a very specific one that we want to leave to the listeners. If we look at what we are doing, so not only your legacy, but as a collective here with the Trans and Intersex History in Africa, we are documenting and archiving. So what would you say for younger activists whether they are in an organization or as an individual, how can younger new activists connect with history, and what is that history important in their current movement building, in their current advocacy work? Why is this history documenting so important?
Thank you very much. Now, why is the history, the documentation of trans and intersex history very important, and why is the work that we do at Trans and Intersex History Africa important? I think that as a trans person, number one, but also as somebody who works with the team at Trans and Intersex History Africa, history is wealth. History is identity. History is pride. History is us. And history, whatever we do today, is history in the making. Now, when you look at this is June, we're in the month of June 2025, and it is Pride Month in most of the world. Why are we marching? Why are we celebrating Pride in March? I mean, in June across the world? It is because some people in 1969, in particular trans women, protested police brutality. 1969 at Stonewall Inn Bar in New York City. That is where pride comes from. And today we walk out in pride to celebrate pride. That is history. We are leaning on history to move forward. There's a lot of things that have been done by those who came before us, trans people who came before us. We can draw strength as younger people younger than me, can draw strength from that history. You can stand on that history and declare. You can stand on that history and be bolder. You can stand on that history and claim spaces because your forefathers, your four siblings, your foremothers were here. You can stand on that strength and claim safety for all trans and intersex people across Africa. It is okay for us to be bold. And I believe if we don't take that step to be bold, nobody will speak for us. As you have seen, it has been a season of erasure, but us standing up over the past 2 decades plus is what is bringing spaces for trans people to be present at many spaces today.
Thank you very much for that very, very powerful message. And it is so good to know about that history, that we don't forget about that, and that we have to keep on with persisting perseverance, especially
Right.
as you say it, in this season of erasure, because this
Yes.
is literally what is being pushing down from all the sides.
Yes.
So yes, we have to boldly exist now more than ever.
Right.
So I want to say thank you and goodbye to all the listeners, the ones that are listening live now, but we also do know that on our YouTube channel and on the website itself, the videos will live. With Facebook, the videos exist about 1 month. But YouTube and our own website, these videos keep on existing. It's part of our archival project. So therefore, I know I'm also thank you to listeners that will still listen to this show of today, listen and look of this show today. What I also want to do today is to say thank you. We do have 2 funders that support us quite a lot, Australia Foundation, as well as the other foundation. Structurally, with technical support and gender dynamics support us. And then for the show of today, I want to just make a highlight to say thank you to Prof. Muholi, because in 2 places we actually used photographs that was being taken by Muholi. One, when you spoke of how you're becoming aware, it shows you the importance of images, of
Yes.
photos. So for that photo we used, and in the very beginning when we had the countdown, there was a photo also taken, like a professional portrait taken by Muholi of you. So I want to say thank you to all of
Kudos
these,
to Professor Muholi.
to
Very
all these
supportive
supporters.
member.
So with that then, thank you very much everyone. Goodbye.
Happy
And
Pride, everybody.
we
Happy
will
Pride
be
2025.
we will be back again next week
Thank
with
you, Liesl.
another exciting talk.